everyone, welcome to another episode of High Energy Girl, and today's awesome guest is Elizabeth Harris. We had an amazing conversation, and her story, you guys, it should be made into a movie. Her son was very sick, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with him, but she took matters into her own hands and figured out that her family was infected by a bacteria called Mycoplasma pneumonia. And even her dog suffered, but she went on to help her son, help her family, and now she's wanting to help anybody and everybody at What's Wrong Wellness. So let's go and say hello to Elizabeth. Hey everyone, welcome to High Energy Girl, a podcast helping women to age stronger because it is never too late to get fit, be strong, and feel sexy. I'm your host, Tracy Gluhige, health coach and personal trainer and founder of highenergygirl.com. Each week, we will either have a guest interview, which will provide you encouragement or an actionable tip to help you age stronger, or I will do a solo episode. Please also join our awesome Facebook group called High Energy Girls, and I'm looking forward to see you on the inside of that group and hope you enjoy today's show. Guess what, everyone? My book is out. It is a revised and updated edition of a book I wrote 5 years ago called No Frickin' Way, 21 Days to Ditch the Diet and Lose Weight the Keto Way by Loving Yourself to Health. When I first wrote the original book, I was not a believer in the low-carb movement, but after all the years of research I've done, I am sold out for life. In this book, you will learn about all the lies you have been fed, how to engage in loving self-care, how to eat nourishing foods that provide massive energy, why the ketogenic diet is not a fad, how to heal your body through fasting, why you should move your body to get stronger, and how to create an empowering mindset. Start reading now and finally achieve the high energy and positive body image you deserve. Check it out on Kindle, on Amazon. And if you like it, please leave us a review because this will help more people find it. I really want to inspire people to not deprive themselves, but to nourish themselves with loving self-care and amazingly healthy food so that they can age stronger. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed writing it. Hey, Elizabeth, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm super excited to talk to you, my dear. So for the listeners that don't yet know you, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Elizabeth Harris, and I live in Franklin, Tennessee. I currently own a spa and have for most of my life, and about 15 years into my career, where I lived a healthy lifestyle, extremely active, physical fitness, help clients with weight loss. My son got a very bizarre illness, an autoimmune disease of the brain. In the meantime, I was also getting sick. Come to find out, there was just a lot more going on than we all know. And so took that path to healing, and now we are doing great.
Cool. So I want to hear all the juicy details about that. So I've never heard of an autoimmune disease of the brain.
Yeah. This one is called PANDAS. It's pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with strep.
Oh.
So
Did
basically,
he have strep?
he did. He had strep. He was about 10 years old in November, and he got strep. And then about 2 weeks later, he came down with very severe neuropsychiatric symptoms. Of course, at the time, I didn't put the two together until one doctor mentioned it sounds like an acute onset of PANDAS. Took him to the emergency room, and from there, it was just, basically 5 or 6 years of hell before we could get diagnosis and correct treatment.
Wow. Wow. And then in the meantime, you said you were feeling really bad as well.
Well, I mean, I attributed my issues to stress, going through a divorce. It was the recession of 2008. I had the spa consulting company, a couple of real estate companies. So, I just thought that it was the stress of everything and lugging the heavy equipment through the airports. I mean, that's what we all think, right? It's the stress, or, so up the exercise, up the physical activity, really got tuned in on the nutrition, and it just wasn't going away. I had this really severe kind of pain in my arm and neck and back, and it just got really bad until I was finally diagnosed with complex regional pain syndrome, which is actually like considered the suicide disease because the pain is so severe. Your skin feels like it's on fire. And so it was just, I was just thinking to myself, I don't think physical therapy is going to fix this, but I'll do it.
Wow. So that is a lot to handle.
It was a lot to handle. And, I think like as a strong girl, we just learn, like, I don't know, maybe I learned it in the 80s in the aerobics class. You just push through, and you just keep going, and you do 8 more and you do 8 more after that. And so I think I was really grateful for that skill set because I just compartmentalized everything and put the focus on my son. And because of that, I also learned what was wrong with me. So it was kind of like a double win, because even though we weren't presenting the same way, it was the same root cause. And so then we were both able to capitalize on that knowledge and gain our recovery.
Okay. And then how did you find that root cause?
A lot of testing, a lot of research. At the end of the day, we had just gone to multiple doctors, multiple institutions, multiple professionals in every arena. And I thought, you know what, they don't know. So I just ordered my son's full legal medical record from the date of his birth all the way through the time when he was 13. And I put him in a 3-ring binder, and I just started reading. And I read every word. I didn't understand the words, but I Googled every word I didn't understand, made my notes. And I just said to myself, this infection that he had as a baby, it has just never gone away. And it has been treated, but it keeps reappearing. And it's been treated with this and this and this, and that didn't work. It came back. And then about the 3rd grade, he started to get hyperactivity. And I looked and I was like, and at this point in time, the treatment slowly began to shift from antibiotics and breathing treatments and whatever else to psych meds. And as we progressed in the 5th grade, he was noticed that he had some anxiety, 4th grade, anxiety disorder. And instead of being sent to an immunologist, we were sent to a therapist, and it's just like, here we go. And then by the time 5th grade, I think there was something else that he acquired, but it just gradually and slowly started shifting to the point where this was left untreated for so long that it caused a misdirected immune response. And so instead of triggering the fever center, it started triggering the amygdala, the cytokine storm, starts to actually trigger other areas of the immune system that aren't really the immune system, therefore resulting in psychiatric symptoms. So because I have a history in biology and chemistry, and I'd lived a perfectly healthy lifestyle, worked out 3-4 times a week, ran every morning, because I knew that all of those things that they want to connect with these diseases, these chronic diseases, were not me. We did not fit in that category. I just stayed strong. That's not me. That's not us. That can't be the cause. And so I just continue to push through that path. And then come to find out, he had lost all ability to have any kind of a physical symptom. He hasn't had a fever. He didn't have a fever since he was like 3rd grade, maybe. So that's what happens. The fever center is no longer triggered. And so as we progress on, then we've got this underlying root, and then we get this external co-infection or this moldy environment or this stressful situation. It comes in and it exacerbates this root that's still there. And so I'm just, I decided after seeing all this with my own eyes that once we did treat that root infection, which took several years, by the way, and unwound it all, he got his first fever at the age of 21.
Wow.
104.
So you basically really made his body back to normal so that your immune system, which thank God we have that,
yes,
actually take care of itself.
Exactly. Now we've got those 10 years where it was misdirected, and he's got those antibodies that have been created against self tissue that he'll always have to watch, because antibodies aren't they're not destroyed, so we'll manage that. But with a new organism coming in, and that's what I kept saying to myself. I kept saying, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with his immune system. Honestly, I'd never looked into autoimmune diseases when all this had happened, because I had no reason to, really. I was looking into cellulite reduction, body contouring, and facelifting, important things. And then all of a sudden I'm slapped with this dilemma and conundrum. The good news is I did not know I hadn't heard anything else. I didn't have any voices in my head already. So I was able to just rely on my observation and trust myself, because I didn't have anything else. I'd been in this spa, in that room, for 15, 20 years, spa conventions, spa this, spa whatever, all spa. And so it was just me just using common sense to watch it. I have 2 adopted children. They start getting symptoms. So these sweet, genetically different children begin getting symptoms, like a psychiatric symptom, and then a week later, a boil behind the ear. And I'm like, there was about a year there where I thought I was living in Wonderland. And I was like, this is contagious. I don't care what they say. I don't care. It is contagious. So it depends on, what the situation is. But I mean, in our case, it was.
So the autoimmune is contagious?
Oh, not the autoimmunity itself. The autoimmunity is not contagious, but there are organisms that live within our cells. And we don't, when they're testing for organisms, they test by the blood. And so when something's in the tissues, unless you go and do an invasive biopsy or something, and just pray that we check the right box for what we're even looking for, because there's 5,000 to 7,000 organisms there could be, And so we rely heavily on somebody like having some kind of godlike intuition to know what to actually look for. Because, once an organism inhabits the tissue, then your immune system does what it's supposed to do. And that's just what I kept on thinking to myself. I was like, Elizabeth, what does an immune system do? What was it created? It was created to fight foreign invaders. I mean, plain and simple. Plain and simple. And that's what it's doing. It is doing its job. It is working. It's just there's no help. There's been no support for it by getting rid of the organism,
That's scary. That's really frightening.
It's very frightening. It's very frightening. And that is why, when I learned the truth and I found out, and then I saw that we all recovered from that, from all of our different diagnoses. I mean, I'd say collectively there was 30. I mean, different kids, anxiety, heart, this, that. And then to just watch them all go away, I thought, how am I going to help other families that might be in this same situation and don't have $1 million worth of assets to lose? Because I did lose everything, going through this. But I mean, at the end of the day, there's things that are just a lot more important than assets. And that's like, our lives and our happiness and our health. And you put all that aside just to try to figure things out. And then when I did figure it out, I said, I've got to tell people. And then I thought, well, I don't know how to tell everybody this. So I was listening to The Secret, just listening to that. And I got to that disc, and I'd never heard that before, The Secret, at all. And I was like, that's positive, bringing the law of attraction. I already live like that. I don't even know I'm listening to CDs. But then on the third one, it said, the Chicken Soup for the Soul. He wrote a book. And I thought, I'm going to write a book. And then I thought, wait a minute, you're no writer. So I post on a Facebook page for the group of the Pandas moms. I was like, okay, I think I figured it out. This is a resistant organism that's been kind of manipulated to contain some parts of viruses in it. And it's going to require a lot more than what we all think it is going to require. And I said, I'm going to write a book and explain it. And a lady I did not even know. I mean, I didn't know her. She commented and said, you are not a writer. You're a scientist. You need an editor. And that night, she had me on the phone with an editor who said she would write the book on contingency. Wow. And tell me that's not supposed to happen. I was like, okay. So I was typed away till we got a book ready. And now it's time to just try to tell as many people as I can that there are options, and that it's not always what you think. And, there is another place to look, and just to try to give people some hope that might have gotten to the point where they just don't know what to do anymore.
Wow. That is, and it's like, when do you even start that? Right? Like, when do you start looking at all of those? Because so often the symptoms, everybody runs to the doctor when they get a symptom and then they put a bandage on it. And I mean, this actually can affect everybody, I think, Elizabeth, or benefit everybody rather.
Mhm.
Right? Is that what it's for?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and back when this organism first, came to be, if you will, I mean, it wasn't so prevalent, but, now 40 years later, it is, it's airborne, it's spread, and most people have been in contact with it. I mean, and we wonder why we have the rates of autism and everything skyrocketing. And then you try to find the common denominator, because I was just always like, okay, what's the common denominator here, that these people over here have this and this have this and this have this? Because I mean, we just don't all go to the same grocery store. We don't all have the same, we don't all have the same taste. We're not all buying from the same guy. And it just is like, it just never, until I learned this information, I was like, now that makes sense. That's the only thing that made any kind of logical sense to me.
Wow. And how long ago did all this happen?
It was about 2013 that we were in the crux of it. And by 14, we were so deep. My son had gotten involved we'd gotten wrapped up in the juvenile court system, which is a whole other travesty in and of itself. The juvenile court system is just full of kids that have problems that aren't diagnosed and are just thrown away and locked up like criminals in jail cells because they've got medical needs or trauma. I mean, the despair that I felt on behalf of my child, not only my child, but also these other children that are just being forgotten or not treated and labeled with these negative, words that you just wouldn't believe. And the amount of therapists and that people just ready to diagnose with these horrible things like conduct disorder and so all these, just labels, when you've never done a simple medical rule out on these kids. It's just like, it is, to me, this is like the most criminal thing. I think I never even could have imagined that this would be how things were outside of the spa. you know
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't have a clue. I mean, honestly, it took me a year or two to just get over the shock, because I'd never thought anyone did anything like that, or had any ill intent or anything like that. It took me a long time, and now I'm just like, mm, mm, mm.
Mm-hmm. Especially after the year we've just had, right?
Well, yeah. And I'm just like, well, this is just, I don't know, this quarter's development for the I won't even go there. But, I mean, we just don't really have much to, anyway, I'll just,
I heard a lot today. I'm going to say whatever I want to say. It's my show.
okay.
Um, but I heard a lot today about kids in the system, CPS,
Mm,
and even like churches and stuff that have not been treated fairly or rightly or justly or purely. And it's a whole big like issue, or like that's putting it mildly. It is
putting it
horrific.
mildly. It's horrific. And if you think about it, there's something called Title 14 funding. Now, my attorney, Connie, she's on our team. If you want to learn more, she can write the book on this. She fights for, for families, on behalf of families against DCS. I mean, they will take your child. They try to get custody of my child. I was taking him to every doctor, but the minute that they make a mistake, they rectify it by taking the child. But you don't want my other three children. You don't want my other three. You want one of my children? Yeah, wait a minute. Two of my children I adopted from you 3 years ago. I adopted two children from DCS 3 years ago. Now all of a sudden I'm a bad mom to one of my biological. I'm telling you, it makes no sense. Just like and I was like, if I hadn't seen that in the juvenile court, I do not believe that I would have been prepared to believe what I saw next. because I just never even, I didn't even know what a conspiracy was. I didn't know what, like, I just had never seen that. And so, but our particular judge had told another lawyer, I don't want to hear anything about autism. Like, she didn't want to hear anything about pandas. She didn't want to hear anything about it. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm here because we can't get a doctor to help us. You're supposed to be a resource for children in need. We were recommended to reach out, and you have put my child not only in a cell and slam the door shut, but later you would go and put him in there for 5 weeks. Judge Sharon Guffey in Williamson County put my son with pandas in a cell for 5 weeks, 7 by 13. Didn't let him see the light of day, but for 1 hour. Didn't let him go to school. Didn't let him talk to his parents, all because she decided she didn't believe pandas, or didn't like me, or didn't like somebody. But they have all the power, and we will never know what's happening in these facilities. Now, if you're lucky enough to get your child out of there, that's great. But your child will have PTSD for forever, and you will spend thousands and thousands and thousands on therapy to get them over that, when they didn't have that before. But if you lose your child to their custody, then your child goes into some God-forsaken rehabilitation, they call it. I mean, they've got these facilities all over the country. There is some kind of financial ties. I don't know enough about it. I'm not an expert in that. You welcome to have Connie on. She is. But this is where they kept trying to shove my son. We're going to, and they trick you. They try to trick you. Just sign this petition, and that is for us to get him some help. And I'm like, most parents just sign it, trusting. When I was like, I don't sign anything without reading it. I picked up and read it. I was like, this is not true. This is not. If you don't sign that, we'll make it a lot nastier.
Oh my gosh, Elizabeth.
It was, and I think that, like, with my underlying disease process, I just like started getting angrier and angrier. And and when he was in solitary confinement, I just didn't sleep. I lost a lot of weight. And then she tried to take him. And, and I knew this, I said, if anybody else gets him, I'll never figure out what this is, and we'll never get him better. He will be put on 10, these kids, they go on immediately all of these psychiatric medications, like immediately. It's like, you got this, and this. And the first experience with that was when we adopted the 2 children. We showed up at the meeting, they read their files. Oh, there's 14 different diagnoses. I was like, those kids do not have that. There's no way they had that. We took them home with us, they didn't have that. I was like, I really didn't know what those things even meant. These were normal, healthy, happy kids. Just think but they came with a warning. And I'm just like, what a sick, sick world we live in.
Oh my gosh. So, of course, you got him off all the meds, detoxed him. And now, how long
Took
ago
him to
was...
Disneyland. Took them to Disneyland, told them they were normal. Later on, come to find out, like, once I found out how DCS kind of worked, because I wonder if their mom really is that bad. Why did they even get taken? Because the story never did make sense. And so I put up like a Facebook profile with a anime person and a fake name, and found their birth mom and talked to her for like 6 months and got the entire backstory. I was like, are you kidding me right now? Would you like your children back? And so we actually ended up befriending her, meeting the whole family, becoming friends with her sister and her grandmother. She had another baby. And so we just they'd come over at Christmas time. So I just thought, is there one single thing in my life that I thought was as it, seemed? Was there anything that was accurate?
Wow.
So I think it was just like, and I just look back and I'm like, how it was like, well, how one person stands so much? I'm like, what, this had to happen like this, because one thing opened my eyes to something, to the next thing, to the next thing, to where when I got here, I was like, wait a minute, 20 years back, like, stop the presses. but that's okay. I mean, some people have to live our only calling, or what we're supposed to do is just use our experiences to try to help other people. And so as long as we do that, we should be healthy and happy.
Well, there's a purpose. There's a purpose. It's a God thing, in my opinion,
Yeah.
that, I mean, I'm just feeling all of this, like there's this path that you're on right now. I mean, I don't think you came on the show to talk about all of that. But I feel like as things unfold in the rest of this, time frame that we're in right now, there's going to be opportunity for you to really be able to be a part of a massive movement.
Yes.
And all of that. So let me ask you, this is totally off the cuff, but if time and money were not an issue and you could follow your heart and help humanity in a certain way, what would that look like for you?
I mean, I would just travel to all of the institutions. I would figure out what I needed to do to change these laws. I would develop and I would implement, and I would get it done. Implement an intake for these juveniles the minute they come in. And I would be all over change and reform in these systems where they take these kids that they give these labels to, and I would get them medical treatment. I would change some of the protocols with AMA. I would change the testing standards when you come in with certain symptoms. I would take the pigeonhole or little box that they have away. You got this symptom, it's this. No, we need to open up the way that we look at the entire body, and we don't need to go to this specialist and that specialist. We need to have one person that's actually like looking at everything. And I know that's what they're supposed to do, but they're either too busy, or I just honestly, what I've seen is I went back to school this January and February because I wanted to see for myself why the medical community didn't seem to know this. So I went and took a molecular, and so I took biochemistry, and then I took an infectious disease class. I skipped a bunch of classes and took that because I wanted to see for myself. They don't know.
Wow.
It is not taught. So I would teach and train and develop videos and try to get massive emails out to the doctors and let them watch little tidbits and see if we could. I know it's a tall order, but we've got to turn it around. Otherwise, by 2050, half of the kids are going to be born with autism. I mean, what is our country going to look like if we don't turn it around? That's my question.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, medicine is changing for sure. I already know about that. That is on the path to completely change. The pharmaceutical mafia is going down. They are freaking going down. And the thing with the autism, okay, I heard a podcast with Dr. Judy Mikovits. Have you heard her name before?
She endorsed my book.
Ooh, I've been trying to get her on my show. Maybe you can help me.
She's
And
awesome.
I was actually invited to go to dinner with her one day. She was in our area and somebody called me last minute and said, hey, do you want to meet us? And I couldn't. I had people here from out of town, big wedding. But anyway, she said Suramin for autism. Have you heard of that?
I have not heard of that. I have not heard of that or looked into it. So she said Suramin for autism.
Yeah, it's Suramin. She goes, oh, that's easy. I can't remember whose show she was on, but I heard her say that. So I have a lot of different clients in different areas. And so I talked about that. The other thing I heard is Dr. Andreas Kalker came on the show, and he, on his blog, has CDS being really helpful for autism. So those are a couple resources, Elizabeth, that may help you with this. But I have a feeling we're going to be talking in the future about collaboration on helping with these kids,
Somebody has to help these kids. I mean, somebody has to help them. They don't have anybody, and they're so young and they have nobody to speak up or advocate. So I am on board 100%.
I think people just aren't aware, like I work with people with nutrition and fitness and things like that, right? They just don't know what they don't know. And you blew my mind. I didn't know anything of all of that.
I didn't either. I was in fitness and nutrition, and we're just like, okay, we need to like, move the lymph nodes a little bit, work out a little more, change this, strengthen that. This is like, whoa, there's a whole other thing going on here that is like devastating and dark. And it's just like, I wish part of me wish I'd never knew it was there, but then the other part of me is like, no, I'm glad I know,
Yeah,
you
well,
know?
now that you know, now that you're aware, you can do something to change it and to improve it. And I work with like a bunch of humanitarians. Well, all of this stuff is going to be happening in the near future, and I will definitely circle back to you. I just tell all my clients and followers that if time and money weren't an issue and you could have a project to completely help humanity, what would that be? And then write it up and say exactly how you would do this and all of that, because the funds are going to be available for people who have this heart and this like calling. And so we're looking for those people.
That's amazing. I mean, that would be incredible. I mean, because it's just, it's going to take a lot of work. I mean, it's going to be a full-time job,
Oh yeah.
morning to night, 7 days a week. Who do we talk to? Where do we go? Because it's really navigating that alone is going to require a lot of energy.
Well, you just put together a team, right? You
Put
don't have
together
to
a
do
team.
everything yourself, right? Many
Right.
hands make light work.
Yes.
So let's talk about your book, and let's talk about how did Judy Mikovits come into that. And that's so exciting. Small world.
Small world. Well, when I first wrote the book, I don't know if you are aware of what I ended up finding out that, was the root cause for us. But I learned that it was actually an organism that they had. I've already, told you so many things. This one's going to be like, what? But there was an organism back in the 80s that they were working with. It was the DOJ, the Army Pathology Lab in Baylor, I think. And they actually, genetically modified a strain of mycoplasma. Now, Mycoplasma fermentans was a kind of a benign organism, lives in the soil, not really airborne and typically not problematic. But the Mycoplasma organism is unique in that it doesn't have a cell wall. So it doesn't respond to like penicillin. It's innately resistant to that. It can actually get inside of our cells. So they knew what they were doing when they took that organism specifically. It's got a very small genome, and they spliced parts of the monovirus EBV and HHV6, those two organisms inside this bacteria. Now, they also made it more pathogenic, heat resistant, antibiotic resistant, and they went to test their little weapon in the Texas prison systems on death row inmates. Now, the death row inmates, I mean, that's like kind of plausible as to why you would do your testing there because, I mean, death row. But what they didn't consider was the fact that these inmates also were carrying like latent infections or maybe even active. So like, for instance, mycoplasma pneumonia is like walking pneumonia, usually kind of self-limiting, or back then it was. But if you're co-infected also with mycoplasma fermentin pathogenic, then you've got a situation where you've got this transverse, genetic transference from one organism to another in the same genus or species. You've even got that in an inverse way. So mycoplasma fermentins to mycoplasma pneumonia, which is airborne. So then the guards, the wardens, the visitors, Huntsville, Texas, I mean, fact check this, please. There's patents, there's all kinds of, proof. And there's also on my website, all the information, but those people that lived in that city of Huntsville came down with rheumatoid arthritis, MLS, and ALS at 5,000% higher rate than the rest of the country. Okay, so now we've got a situation where this is just slowly spreading and nobody knows why. That was the one with HHV6 in it, 10 to the 6th power. The one that had the mono in it causes the fatiguing illnesses. So, and that was mostly limited to the Gulf War syndrome that wasn't pathogenic and didn't spread, but their wives came down with, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and their children had autism, because when you have a child that's already infected, I call it, then you also add the vaccinations to it. That's too much on their system, and they get an encephalitis of sorts, which is a little bit exciting in that it should be reversible, at least partially so. So then we've got that situation, and now it has just spread. And now 33% of any physician's, patients, I've talked 100 of them, basically they're just chronically ill and they don't know what's wrong, because this organism is not just a bacteria. It's not just a virus. It's like a mutant strain. So sometimes it's like, you get online and they're like, oh, HHV6 and chronic fatigue, or EBV, it's all these things. And I'm like, wait a minute, you guys are not getting it. It's a Russian cocktail. It is like a mixture, but at this point in time, all the mutations and the resistance has just, and it just, I just don't know how we are going to get it out there, but a way will be provided. A way will be provided. And the first step was me writing the book, because the first book I wrote is called America's Infected. It was 450 pages long. It was like a 55-page bibliography. I call it my unabridged version. And it was just like straight up science with some story in it, because I wanted people to understand exactly what IVIG was, what the mechanism of action is, why that wouldn't work, and what happens when you got it, why so it was written like that. And that is when I met Dr. Mikovits, because a lady that read it, Andi Durkin, she's president of Down Syndrome Options. She actually edited the first book. And she put me in touch with Judy. And we chatted back and forth, and I sent her the book, and she read about half of it. And she said, I couldn't read the rest of it. It's giving me PTSD, because her book, at that point in time, she'd already written her book, Plague. And I think she had just come out of the situation where she had been, dealing with that pharmaceutical company. But, the common denominator is the mycoplasma, because if you look at Fauci back in 1980, you can see, Connie found me a little clip, and he's like sitting there, the mycoplasma has nothing to do with it, and then you're just like, aye. And here we are 40 years later, still the mycoplasma has nothing to do with it. Yet in other countries, like if you go pull, like look at my library when you want, but just look at like the scientific research. I spent 4 months pulling research from all over the world. They clearly know it in other countries. I mean, mycoplasma is found in every single liver cancer cell. So it's just like, if we can't get to the root and we can't treat the right thing, how are we going to reverse it? And if our focus is all split and scattered, I think that's really what, will keep us in bad shape. But if we can all get educated on what it really is and learn about it, then I think we have a chance. But it's going to take a village or country.
Yeah, that is crazy. So do you believe, based on all your research and experience, that this how do you say it?
Mycoplasma.
Mycoplasma, is it proliferating and getting worse and worse and worse?
I'm not so sure about that piece of it, but because it's not being even addressed or acknowledged, basically, it just will spread from one part of the body to the next. So for instance, you get this symptom, and then like you said, you go and you get that treated, and then 2 years later, all of a sudden something else is flaring up, and you're like, what happened? And it's like, it's spreading around your body, and it's just different symptoms. Cause like and I'll tell you, like the workouts that I used to do were insane. And part of me is like, well, maybe I was, but the soles of my feet, I thought, oh, plantar fasciitis. Then my shins, I think, oh, shin splints. Then my knees, and I think, oh, chondromalacia. Well, I don't think that. I go to the doctor, and these are all the things that I've been told I have over the years, and then this and this and this, and then finally this horrible disease at CRPS. It was so interesting though, because once you start the treatment, the symptoms unwind, and all those things that you'd experienced throughout your life, they unwind, and you feel them again as the colonies are kind of dying off. And it is surreal. It is like science fiction. It's very hard to get through. And that's why I spend so much time educating people about it. Don't embark on this journey unless you are very educated and you understand that these things are going to cycle back through, because as they colonized, you got the symptom. As they die, you will get the symptom again. It feels a little different when it dies. But yeah, I mean, I've seen like, 200-300 people, go through the protocol plan. And I mean, every single one of them, 25-year-old schizophrenic, that's 300 pounds. It's not a schizophrenic anymore. It's just like, okay, this is
What
not.
was the treatment? Is this in your book?
Yeah, I mean, antibiotics, low dose. You use low dose doxycycline. And I hesitate to even say anything because there's so much to it, and it's such a thing that you really need someone to guide you through it. It's not something you can just go, because it's a multiple kind of a shotgun approach. You can go that route, but you've got to be careful and go with low doses and then gradually work up and not stop certain ones and rotate through. And then our second option, which I'm really excited about, is nutraceuticals. We can use our researched nutritional nutraceuticals. I will say that I do think the best outcome is with kind of a mix. We now have an energy scanner. I use a Zyto Elite to give clues. You get thorough health history scan and scan every month, and then scan during the hercs, and it just really gives us a lot of ideas. And recently I've been scanning entire families, just trying to identify that core organism that's, got that family bogged down. Of course, then you got to consider environmental stuff too. It's a lot.
Wow,
It's a
wow.
lot.
So was it initially for a biological warfare type weapon? Is that why this was all started in the lab?
That is the story. And I've always said, I'm like, you know what, when I get my turn to talk, and I say, I'm always going to just make sure people are aware, I can testify to what I saw and what I lived. And I can tell you that there was nothing else in our labs. But my son had a mycoplasma infection, and then he had all kinds of antibodies. Now his strep pneumo was real pathogenic because mycoplasma pneumonia inversely transfers to streptococcal pneumonia, which is the sinus stuff. So if you've got like chronic sinus stuff, and then there's the ethmoid sinus, and a lot of psych symptoms come from there. So with all that said, that's the only thing that was wrong. I got him this $10,000 genetic test, and everybody's like, oh, well, check the genes. But sometimes when they do genetic testing, it's really just to see like, can you take this medication, or can you metabolize this? I'm talking about like true genetic testing. Got it back. Didn't even have a gene for anything he'd been diagnosed with. So get this, 2 adopted kids. They've got symptoms. We don't have the same genes. Has his genes tested, all his labs for his entire life. And I'm like, it's a mycoplasma infection. And they're like, it can't be that. It doesn't have the signs of pneumonia. I'm like, that's what it is. And that's where I got locked into finding, I said, I'm going to find a mycoplasma expert. I don't care. And I was just, only one guy. I called over to a researcher at Vanderbilt because then I didn't know what I was doing at all. And I said, I need to talk to somebody about mycoplasma, please. And they're like, we don't have anybody here that studies that. And I was like, well, and she's like, what is it? And again, I think this was my path. This was pre-planned, because who picks up the phone like that in a research department? And how did I even think to do that? I didn't know to do that.
You
But
got to download. You were listening to God. Like you
I
got
had
to
to
download.
Because who in the world? This girl at the desk says, but we do have someone on staff that studies chlamydia pneumonia. So I'm Googling what's that, and it gets in the cells too. And I'm like, yeah, I need to talk to him. And what are the chances that this guy picks up the phone at that time? And then I asked him he goes, there's only one man in this country that's studying this organism. That's Dr. Garth Nicholson. And I'm like, where is he? So and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy has studied it. And then I read the story, and I just started crying, because I immediately put it together, and I thought, this is it, because all the stuff that he had connected on his site, it was imed.org. And then, but still, I'm still a scientist. He had the protocol, because I'd already figured out we had to have antibiotics. I just didn't really know. I knew Levaquin because of 19A on strep pneumo, and I was on the right path, but I would have never gotten there if it hadn't been for his protocol. But before I ordered my antibiotics from India, which we ended up having to do, I was like, I just had to find it. myself. I need to see if I have it. Is that what these other kids have, you know? And so nobody would give the test. Not a G, not a general practitioner, not a pediatrician, not any specialist, nobody. And I was like, look, it's a polymerase chain reaction. You swab the nose and put it in the test tube and overnight it to this lab. I've already checked the box. Could not get it. Come to find out, it was not on the formulary at the institution around here. And I'm like, what's a formulary? So it's just like this whole, thing of thinking there's a lot to, but I came down when I was going through my die-off process. I came up with a little black spot in the back of my throat, and I thought, I use this to my advantage. So I went in, not to my advantage, but I went into the ENT and I was like, I think, what if it's cancer? You better biopsy it, And so he cut it out, and I knew you would probably find it in there and send it off. And I checked the box. Fortunately, he was like, no, I've got a lab I use. And I was like, I went through that just so you can use your lab and not find out. He calls me an hour later at the grocery store, and I'm like, hello? And he's like, well, you know what? They don't do that testing you've requested. So what was the name of that lab? And I was like, so he sends it off and mine comes back positive. I'm like, okay, there's 2 down. And then I got to tell you, I still was like leery. I don't know why. I mean, I knew it was true. We got 1, we got 2, but I still was just like, and I read the story, the whole thing, and I understood it pretty much. And there was one section that said, if you have it, your animals can acquire it. Pets do, and I started thinking to myself, I was like, there is a lot of stuff going on with dogs. I hear, about the spa, like, they've got this, they've got that. And I thought, and then I remembered this dog we had adopted a year earlier. And I thought back, our animals had died early deaths. And I started things start clicking. And I thought, I wonder if that's it. Well, this new dog we had named Buzz, he was a year old by this time, when we picked him up at the pound, when my son was 14 for his birthday, went and got him. He didn't want to, because he was like, I think he will just die. We bring him home. And I'm like, no, he won't. Bring him home. Within 2 weeks, he's coughing, reverse sneezing. Of course, me thinking that he came with some kennel cough or something, of course, I'm like literally freaking out, run to the vet. And I'm like, he's got a kennel thing. We just got him from the pound. You've got to make sure he doesn't have any dog diseases, because my son could get it. Of course, the vet's like, your son's not going to catch anything from a dog. And by this time, I'm just like thinking, whatever. I don't know if I believe anything any of y'all are saying, but please check the dog. So he checks him for every doggy disease. And then he puts him on, get this, puts him on an antibiotic just to make me comfortable, because he's negative for all that. And then he puts him on hydrocodone to make him not cough. And I'm like, what? Okay, anyway. So I guess that's the thing too. Bring the dog home. And you know what? I would never tell a story if it hadn't ended up being true. Within a couple weeks, that dog went crazy. The dog went crazy. He was tearing through the house, could barely pee outside, just dribbling, was standing at the thing, looking at me through the window like this, which is like a symptom of pandas. Pupils get huge. And I was like, this can't be true. This cannot be true, And I didn't tell anybody. I just didn't tell anybody until he started, he had abdominal tics. What tics are. And I thought, no, you're thinking those are hiccups. And I just kept talking myself down, and a couple weeks later that kind of passed. And then he walked sideways. I thought, I'm just not even gonna look at that dog. But when this all happened, I said to myself, wait a minute, if he caught it back then, that explains that sequela of everything, and he would still be positive. So I thought, a vet's not going to argue with me, and they don't have a formulary. So I go and I fill my little paper out, and I walk in there and I'm like crying. I'm like 120 pounds by now. I look like I've got cancer. My kid's like in and out of detention. They're trying to take it from me. And I'm just like probably looking so crazy. And I'm like, can you test this dog for mycoplasma pneumonia? And that's like, Elizabeth, he doesn't have that. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm crazy, but if I write you a check before I lose the house, can I just get the test, And he agreed to do it. He sent it off. And he called me a week later and he said, I don't know how to explain this, but Buzz has tested positive for mycoplasma pneumonia. And then that was the thing in me that was just like, okay, this is a thing. What this man said is true because everything has checked out. Like now, even the dog has checked out. So I have got to walk in faith and know that this protocol is the only thing I've got to get me and my kids healthy. Like that's all I've got to go on. So I laid it out and I thought, I didn't know how to get all the antibiotics I needed. And so a client in the spa, I was telling her my conundrum. A lot of them have been coming here for years. And she was like, oh, you can order those online. And I was like, isn't that dangerous? But then I started thinking, how ridiculous did that sound? Your kid has like run a car through a building in downtown Franklin and you're worried about, if there's filler. So I thought, this is life or death. We didn't have an option. So I just set it all out and we did it. Fortunately,
Wow.
along the way, I found some doctors. Now we have a lot of health providers, a lot of them around us, but it felt so lonely at the time to step out and just do that big of a move with no guidance, not understanding the hercs and how to manage that. And so I just thought, if I ever get the chance and this works, I'm going to circle around and help everybody else so it's not this hard, but that is
Wow.
my story.
You are one hell of a lady, Elizabeth. I am so impressed. And you were guided, right?
100%.
Better
Not
from
me.
than from anybody else. That is, oh my God, I have shivers all over my body hearing this.
Isn't that crazy? And so that's why, like, my editor teamed me up with Dr. Mikovits and said she has a similar situation, a similar story. See if it's the same organism. Maybe you guys could collaborate. So her situation was where she had found some retroviruses, and she was documenting all that. And then they wanted to just like shush her. So I don't think that we're just dealing with one single thing. That's my point. I think that we've got multiple things going on. And I think we make a mistake when we get pigeonholed into just, oh, it's always mycoplasma, because it's not. I mean, the grandparents and the siblings and what all have they developed, and I think when we get ourselves into it, it's always this, or it's always the food, it's always the stress, it is a combination of things, and it just takes a lot of research to uncover what it is in a family system or even in just one person.
Yeah. Gosh, that is complicated.
It's very complicated.
It's really complicated. Just from my layman's mind, it says that testing for that should be a standard test to rule it out before a treatment for something else. But I have another question for you. So when you said about like it would go here and then here and here, is that the correlation with all these different autoimmune diseases?
You mean, yes. Yeah. So it's like it's the same thing. It's just like you are being colonized either in your, lungs or as an asthma and, COPD later, or, it is your kidneys and you've got lupus, or it's your thyroid and you got or you got rheumatoid arthritis because it's your knee. And, I don't, yeah.
One of my friends that I grew up with, I'm 55, so, she's been dealing with this for a long time. She, when we were young, had asthma. And then later on in high school, she got lupus. And then she got Hashimoto's and fibromyalgia. And it just keeps cascading. She may have every autoimmune or most autoimmune diseases by now, because I noticed that they accumulate. Like they say every 7 years, you'll get another one. Is that true?
I mean, I don't know if it's every 7 years, but I know that yeah. I mean, you just get one, you get another one, you get another one, and then you do these things and, you're really trying to do everything everybody tells you to do, and it's just like not adding up. And then you just continue to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And I just think that's just so unfair, because it's like at some point you get so sick that you can't even make your own decisions, so it's like you can't, if you're in a psychiatric state where you just can't make a decision, it's just very unjust. So
Yeah.
it's like, okay, are these people really doing these things, or are these organisms doing these things? And then the more I learn about the behavior that an organism can cause in someone, the more I just question everything.
Yeah, especially these kids. Like one of my new clients, her and I were talking yesterday. She's a special ed teacher, and she was talking about how half the kids have ADD, half the kids have autism, and it makes you really wonder. Like when I was growing up, nobody had ADD. They just told me I talk too much, you know? Um, like really, but it's like, what is all this? Maybe there's this correlation between, gosh, I can't remember what you call it, the
Mycoplasma.
mycoplasma. I never heard of that word before. So maybe there's something to do with that and how it influences the brain, perhaps, or maybe the adrenals or something, right?
Exactly. Because like, you know what, if you have a predisposition to like having a lot of sinus infections, then that area of your body is weak. You know, and mycoplasma can either be a standalone infection on its own, or it can become opportunistic if you already have weak spots in your body. So for instance, how come someone can have a car wreck and then they recover fine, and then somebody else 10 years later, they're still struggling with this debilitating pain?
Mm.
Well, you know, we've got this situation to consider now. It's this variable, and we've got to admit there's a variable, because in addition, someone has a traumatic experience, you know, and then they, you know, they work through it. It's hard, it's depressing, it's, you know, I mean, it's painful. And then you got somebody else that can't recover, you know, and it's like there is, you know, a weak spot in their trauma center. It just all fits. It all fits. And there's really not anything that you can't understand once you understand this.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's mind blowing. So, Elizabeth, how can people find your book?
You can go to my website, what'swrongwellness.com, and watch a little video. You can click on pre-order at any time. You can jump over and get it from either Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and you will get a free symptoms checker.
Cool. When does it come out?
October 26th is the hard published date, so coming up
Cool.
soon.
Cool. Awesome. So your website sounds like it has a lot of resources on it.
So many resources, so many resources. It has the bibliography on there that all the information I read when I came to learn this about this information in here. And then in addition, I've got a second link with tons of scientific research, you know, that I've just all pulled together for, you know, researchers or physicians that might want to look into it. And I'll be adding more every
Oh,
week.
awesome. Awesome. I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show, for opening our eyes to stuff that nobody, I mean, I didn't know anything about any of this. So it was truly an honor to have you here.
I am so grateful that you gave me a platform to share with whoever's watching, whoever's listening, whoever might need this information to get better. So thank you very much.
Okay, that was one of my top interviews. I adore this woman. She really choked me up. I love her passion, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Please go check out her new book, where you can find it and pre-order it at the show notes page at highenergygirl.com/show, or go to her website at what'swrongwellness.com. All right, you guys, thanks so much for listening. Make it a great day. This podcast contains the opinion and thoughts of its host and guests. It is intended to provide helpful and informative material on the subjects covered. All statements made on the podcast have not been evaluated by the FDA and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. If the listener requires professional assistance or advice, please contact your personal medical doctor. Both host and guest specifically disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence directly or indirectly of the use and application of any of the contents of these episodes. Like I said, this is my opinion and I could be wrong.